Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. If you could please fill out the questions in front of you. Hi, and welcome to the webinar. We have Asi Barak from Games for Change, who's also.
Thank you, Erin. Welcome everyone. And what we're going to do today, we're going to speak a bit about the idea that you use games for social change. That would be the first part. We'll talk about the why and we'll give a few examples of successful games. The second part will be more about the class. So we'll see how we translate everything we discussed in the first part into the context of the School of Visual Arts and the program of Design for Social Innovation. So let's start. I titled the presentation "With Great Power Comes Great Responsibility." More than ever before, we had a chance to kind of look at the power of games and what gaming can mean to our lives. And personally, 5 years ago, games were kind of very marginal in our lives, and even for me, it was hard to explain to people how they could be used outside of entertainment. It seems that in 2011, it's much easier case to sell, and people understand that gaming are around us. You don't need to be a gamer. You don't need to be a 13-year-old guy with a console and a pizza box. Talking about people that play games Subway on mobile, they play games at home or at work on Facebook, and games are basically everywhere. And not to mention games that are non-digital, and we'll talk about that as well. I'm kind of presenting from two perspectives. One is actually three. One is obviously the faculty of the School of Visual Arts and this program DSI, but it's also the idea that I'm coming from a for-profit company that I founded a few years back called Impact Games, and now I'm running a non-profit organization called Games for Change. So the whole idea that I've seen games being sold, but I'm also seeing games being used for causes and kind of trying to promote change. I'm coming from a very small place called Israel, and just to put the red dot on the map, you're kind of invading three neighboring countries, and that was my beginning at the age of 33. Um, sorry, next slide. We're with the age of 5, and here you see an authentic drawing that I made as a kid. My mother was kind enough to save it and show it to me after years, and it just shows you what a kid at the age of 5 in Israel is growing up with. The situation is very intense. The conflict is all around you, and again, this is something I did when I was 5. And then 13 years later, you actually go to the army. So the whole, what was before a drawing, a virtual thing becomes very real. If you weren't sure who I am in the picture, I'm the guy with a circle around his head. And that was again facing reality, facing the conflict. I did it for 5 years. I was an officer, and kind of after that, I really needed a break. And I basically went to the entertainment industry in Israel, worked for an IT company, and I'm telling you my personal story because I think it's also relevant to many of you that are kind of looking for this path in life of finding purpose. And this happened to me at the age of 33. That suddenly I realized that I'm doing all those entertainment products, mobile applications. I was traveling every 2 weeks to another exotic country around the world selling dating applications, but at the same time something was missing, and even more so there was a whole disconnect between what I'm doing at my profession and what's happening around me. The idea that the conflict is still there, and what I'm doing is nothing to do with the things that really matter in the world. So the next step was to go out on a journey. So we're back in the map, and we're finding another small place called Pittsburgh. And I traveled to Pittsburgh at the age of 33 to go to Carnegie Mellon, Carnegie Mellon University, which I think was a great choice, and I'm really happy for finding it by accident. Maybe some of you found this program by accident, and I hope you'll have the same kind of experience that I went through with Carnegie Mellon. It was very early back then. Right now, it's a very known program, and very pioneering in the whole idea that you take art, you take technology, and combine it with meaning. The guy that I met there, that was my mentor and professor, is Randy Pausch. Some of you might know Randy from the last lecture. If not, I really recommend you to check it on YouTube. Video that got millions of views, became a bestseller, and Randy is dead for a few years now. But that was the last lecture he made when he knew that he has only 4 to 6 months to live. And the whole idea of how he achieved and fulfilled his childhood dreams was a very inspiring story. When I met him, he was still the founder and professor at the program. And when I came at the age of 33, all the other students were 23, 22. And I took the opportunity to pitch a project. This is another thing that I think is very relevant to the idea of this program, that it's not only what you do after the 2 years you're at the program, it's also what you can do to change the world while in school. And in some cases, in school, you have more opportunities to test the boundaries, more opportunities to do things that are very unique. And I think I was lucky to find this program and the opportunity. And I pitched a project that was kind of my idea, and I brought together a team of students with me. And the idea was to create a game. And remember, it's like 2004. The idea was to create a video game around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When I told the idea to people, the reaction, including from Randy Pausch, was, "You're crazy. You're absolutely crazy." And in his language, it was widely out of scope. He thought it's very interesting, but that I have no chance whatsoever to do it in 1 semester, even not in 2 semesters with a group of students. It's really crazy and ambitious. But again, to Randy's credit, I would say that he allowed us to try, and he allowed us to do it. And I'm sure that we'll do the same in our program. The whole idea that if you have a dream and if you have a vision, you can really go for it. What started as a student project became a commercial product and became a company and Peacemaker to publish it all over the world. We sold over than 100,000 copies, and the whole idea that you can take this media that is usually regarded as very shallow and violent and deal with the most, you can see here the perception that not only that they're not really contributing to us intellectually or emotionally, in some cases they're even bad for us or bad for our kids. Another criticism from someone like Roger Ebert is not necessarily saying that games are bad, but it's also dismissive in the sense that no matter how hard we try and how amazing our design will be, we'll never get to the level of traditional media. We'll never get a masterpiece like a great movie is. And I disagree with both views, but this is what we have to struggle with. Same time, when we talk about the power, we're talking about a huge industry all over the world that in many countries already surpassed music and movies, over $60 billion. We're talking about huge amounts of players. 100 million is just one number that I took from one of the more successful Facebook games called Cityville. So at its peak, 100 million were actively playing the game on a daily basis. And this is huge. This is something that you don't have with any other medium as a social experience. Another number is the next one, 407 million hours a month. This is a Nielsen recent survey that says that games basically go to number 2 of all internet activities after social networks. And in that basically moving above email. So people are playing games online more than they use email. Now let's talk about the responsibility. So you remember we took the famous Spider-Man quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." If we're talking about such power and such influence, what it means beyond the numbers and beyond the stats is that my daughter, Amalia, she's now 2 years and a half, is going to be influenced by games of all forms, probably more than any other media in her life. lifetime. So she's basically going to play games. She's already playing games, obviously, on iPhone or iPads. And that means that as designers, we need to do something different. This is not a new idea. So if you look at traditional media, the whole idea that you could communicate social agenda, that you could make meaningful impact, that you can actually convey very deep thoughts or deep ideas is not new at all. I took Charles Dickens as an example for books, basically going and tackling every meaningful issue of. Let's look at other examples. Let's look at comic books, and we're not here talking only about a few products. We're talking about a whole industry that changed its name. Comic books, we started to see a new genre of graphic novels. Again, the whole idea that you could tell personal stories like Persepolis or like Mouse through this media that, just like games, was regarded very shallow and in some periods of the 40s and 50s even damaging the kids' minds. TV shows obviously could deal with serious issues, and MASH is one of the most viewed series of all time in the context of a war zone. Documentaries, this is something that is obvious to all of us, but wasn't obvious 30, 40 years ago. And Al Gore, with the very basic concept of a documentary, takes an issue like climate change and bringing it to the topic of conversation all over the world. Even the Oscars, let's look at something that is very mainstream, very kind of blockbuster oriented. And let's look at some of the winners and the nominees of last year. We will see a lot of social issues and very serious. So we believe that games could be meaningful too. And this is kind of the agenda of Games Through Change as an organization. But it's also something that we want to do in the course and the program here. The idea that when you come to the class, use the media of games that is becoming more dominant than any other media, and really address any issue that you'd like and any vision you have. I want to speak a bit about where we are in terms of this movement, of this idea that you could use games for social agenda. It started as an event, and this year we had the 8th of its kind. In 2004, there were 20 people that came to the event. In 2011, we had 800, and we had Al Gore, Mr. Social Change, as the keynote of the event. It just shows you the progress and what it means. Each one of those cases, and I'll talk about Sandra Day O'Connor's project later, but all of them started to be involved with game projects on a national scale. Another thing that is really taking momentum is the whole idea that research, very interesting research, is start to showing what games are actually doing and how they're not only that they're not damaging, they're actually promoting 21st century skills and different kind of thinking that we didn't have with traditional media or with the traditional way that schools are operating in. And you know, all this together, this momentum, mainstream adoption, the research, are leading to the fact that some of the most dominant organizations in social innovation and social impact are actually using games and funding games, from the White House to NASA to governments, corporations, foundations. Basically now we're almost like in a place where not only that we don't need to convince anyone, it seems like everyone wants to play. Everyone wants to play in this emerging space. These are some of the new chapters that we started around the world. So the whole idea that it's also a global idea. It's no longer just a US-centric thing. I'm going to skip that for a second. One thing that we're really looking at now is how we make it more sustainable. So the whole idea that until now we had a few very nice cases and success stories, but we want to see how this community is becoming a marketplace for ideas or almost like a social change engine. And this is also relevant for the class because it means that there is a future. So if you go to the class and you do something really cool that is around gaming, want to show you 5.
I just want to see if
We're good?
we're good.
Okay. So the first case that I want to show you, and this is more like to show you the numbers, because one thing that we always had is really a great idea, and some of the headlines we had in the press were always, wow, games could change the world. And what I want to show you today are some of the numbers, the metrics, like what it's really doing, and how many people could you really affect with this. iCivics is a project that Sandra Day O'Connor started. The story goes like this. She retired from the Supreme Court and started asking kids, what are the 3 branches of government? And no one could answer. Or, she had really poor percentage of kids that actually knew. But when she asked them what are the 3 judges of American Idol, they were like, boom, boom, boom. They all knew the answer. And she understood that popular media should be the way for her to get people to understand, especially kids, how the government works. And she chose video games, and it was more like an instinct than anything else, because she saw her grandkids playing games. And since then, since she announced the initiative of iCivics, her group made 10 different games. You can play the president, you can understand the legislative process, the court system. Really a very nice, and they're all free. And in terms of numbers, we're talking about 1.2 million players in schools since they launched it, 50 states all across the US. And in terms of evaluation, that becomes very important in our field. The idea of, can we measure what really happens when the kids play the game? And what do they say after the experience? We see that there is not only increase in learning and understanding of how the government works, there's also the idea that they actually take the game from the school to play at home for fun. And that's usually something you can say about a textbook. Case number 2, developing world. This is something that is a very new trend that I'm very excited about. We're doing a few projects now. I'm going to tell you give you one example from an Indian developer called ZMQ. Look at the reach, 67 million devices. The game was around HIV, very basic games for very simple phones. We're not talking about iPhone, we're talking about feature phones, kind of what we used 5 years ago. Great reach, great evaluation metrics again. The idea that you can reach people that are the hardest to reach, and unlike in the US or Europe, the competition is very different, because there's less competition with entertainment. There's more time to spend with what you're creating, and arguably there's more impact. Case number 3, direct action. This is something that came especially from Facebook and the iPhone. The idea that you can start creating games that are not only living in the virtual world, they're actually connected to some real action out there. And Free Rice is a very simple example. People can play Free Rice, that was actually funded and launched by the UN. It's a word game more than anything else. It's a spelling game. But every time you get the answer right, rice is donated in the real world. And it's still on, and you can play it this minute, maybe after the webinar. But in terms of metrics and numbers, look what happens on a daily basis. 8 million page views for Free Rice that actually donates 45 million grains of rice to feed 2,500 people every day, just as a result of people playing a game. Case number 4, youth making games. So here is a new idea, and again, we're getting more sophisticated, and we're thinking about more ways to impact through this media. So now the whole idea that it's not only that kids could learn by playing games, they could learn a lot by designing games. And in this context of our program, it's very clear. But we see more and more educators and more platforms that are created to enable this. This is just a very quick landscape of some of the platforms out there that allow kids without any knowledge of coding to actually make games, just by moving blocks around and using very simple tools. And one thing that probably most of you don't know, but you can check it out, and it's out there for the second year, the White House announced a national STEM challenge. STEM is the new slogan that's, for those of you who don't know, stands for Science, Tech, Engineering, and Math, which is the top agenda of the White House and the federal government now in terms of education. And the whole national STEM challenge is around creating games, kids creating games that deal with STEM. Another example, Scholastic. Those awards are out there for 80 years. And some of the winners as high school students are people like Andy Warhol or Capote. And in this case, for the last 2 years, they also use game design as one of the categories. Again, putting it in the same level as painting, sculpture, and other disciplines. The last case that I want to talk about is probably the deepest and most interesting evaluation ever did on a video game. The game is called Remission, and Remission was a game for that targets kids that have cancer, patients. And they did a very robust and expensive evaluation just to prove the impact of that game. They did a test of a group that played the game versus a group that never saw the game, all treated for cancer. And look at the conclusion. And they published it not in game journals or game publications. They went and published it in medical publications with a group of PhDs. And they showed that the treatment actually improved as a result of playing the game. So the kids were more consistent in taking their drugs just by playing this video game that was created for that. Another thing they went and did, and this is, if I'm talking about trends, this is even more recent and more exciting than anything in evaluation, is brain research. The whole idea that you can map areas in the brain and start to understand how games are affecting the brain in different ways than traditional media. So the teaser for the next part would be that your game could be definitely added to this list. It will take you probably 2-3 years to make it, but we'll talk about that as well. And maybe we'll do a pause to answer some questions.
I think if anyone has questions, you can write them into the box, and we'd be happy to just take a break.
Okay, so we'll give a few minutes for questions, and then we'll try to answer them quickly. Right.
Can you talk about
Yes.
how they fit into bigger?
So in essence, the way, and we'll talk about it in the second part also in terms of our methodology for the class, but basically we look at platform, like the choice of technology or non-technology, as part of your design process. So it's not only about creative. You know, many times people come to us, even our foundations or NGOs, and say, you know, I have this amazing, cool idea, and we're like, wait, let's go step by step. Who's your audience? What's the context? What are you trying to achieve? And then the choice of platform is very, very tied to that thought process. And to me, making a street game, a game that has no technology involved, is a choice of platform. For certain ideas or certain objectives, that might be the best way to go. Or light technology, maybe it's a street game with some use of mobile technology. Board games could be very effective in the developing world. Same card games as well. And so again, this is a choice based on your audience and other factors.
Worked with Jane McGonigal before.
Yeah, Jane McGonigal is a good friend. She's on our advisory board. She's part of the movement, and she's participating in our events. She's definitely one of the ambassadors for that idea, and she's especially good and experienced with what's called ARGs, alternate reality games. Okay. Alternate reality games are games that go beyond the screens. So the whole idea that people go and collect clues in the real world and find the graffiti and this is how they make progress. And this is something she's very excited about. And I recommend to watch her TED Talk, which is very good, from 2010.
Rafaelo is also asking if you can view.
And we can also put the presentation.
So if there are No other questions, we can move forward.
Yeah, let's upload the second part. Yeah. So the idea, I just want to kind of connect it to, oh, we have to go to, just want to connect the two parts and say, you know, I ended the I ended the presentation with your game here, and it's not just a slogan. I mean, making games might seem very complex, and some of them are very complex. I mean, people are now, companies are making games with teams of over 200 people sometimes for many years with budgets that are in the dozens of millions of dollars. But there are also games that are created by one or two person team, and especially when they're non-digital, but also in the digital space, you will see more and more artists and more people that have kind of social agenda that are making very small but effective games. Um, and I think there are more ways to be involved in games, just pure design in terms of you know, kind of contributing to the content, contributing to the strategy around them. So I think it's, again, it's a very exciting moment and an opportunity to join in. What I want to go over now is kind of our methodology of thinking about designing games. And this is what we're going to do in the class. So the idea of this class won't be that we're just designing in theory. We're actually going to make products. And no worries. I mean, we're going to be there to help if someone really needs a boost in technology or to find the right tools. But at the same time, you're going to choose whatever fits your idea and whatever fits your purpose with our guidance. And the idea is that at the end of the semester, you would have at least one product, maybe even more, that you actually pitched, that you thought about very in a very structured way, and you kind of found a way to make it tangible. So it's not going to be only an idea on paper. And the way we kind of think about it, we call it the 8 steps, is a process that is, as I mentioned before, it's much more than just thinking about the creative idea. It's a process that starts with understanding who you're actually making this product for, and ending with how you're going to measure the impact of the product. And this is kind of a loop that is not really linear, because you jump from one circle to the other throughout the process. I think it could fit many other design assignments, but it's definitely something that we saw very effective in thinking about games. The idea is also that when you make a game for change, when you make a game for social causes, you're actually a publisher. You're not only a designer. Because it's so new, there are no publisher in this space. There are no people that are going to solve marketing and distribution for you. So a lot of what we're going to see here is the idea that you need to at least be involved with all of those steps. The first two steps that are probably more important than anything else are figuring out your audience. Usually we do it in a very deep way. So it's not just answering the age range. It's really going very deep into, okay, so what's the age group, but what's the gender, what's their psychology, what's their gaming ability, because in some places that we're now designing games for people who have not necessarily played games before. What, in terms of the subject matter, what their attitude, so for example, if it's a game around farming and changing some practices that a certain population has into a more sustainable farming solution, what's their attitude around the change, and why are they doing their traditional things in the traditional way they're doing it? Context is very important as well. This is number 2. That's the whole idea that games could be played in many different ways, and it's very different if you create a game for people at home or on the street, and you expect them to find the game on their own, or if you create a game for a moderated environment like school or a community program, of if you're going to have a facilitation by an NGO, makes huge difference in the way you think about it, and even the materials that you're going to attach to the game. The third step, and something that we're going to emphasize in the class a lot, because it's probably the anchor of the whole thing, is why are you doing it, and what are you trying to achieve. And the goal could be very specific, and we're trying to make it very focused and specific, because obviously you can't aim at everything. And this is what you're going to measure at the end. If your game is about raising funding, we're going to measure it. And if it's about raising awareness, how do we measure it? There is kind of a scale. You could be going for a modest goal that says, I'm only about raising awareness or kind of conveying a message. The other side of the scale is behavior change. And some games are like the one I showed you with Remission, are really going all the way to say, not only that I want this person to change opinions, I really want him to change something in the real world that he's used to do every day, and he's going to do it in a different way. And that's kind of the holy grail. And when you do something for behavior change, the intervention needs to be very persistent and very robust. Choice of platform, we talked about it earlier. After you know your audience, and after you know your context, and after you know what impact objectives or learning objectives you have for your game, we're talking about choosing the right platform. And huge differences, even in terms of budgets and scope, between making a mobile game to making a full-scale console game or a Facebook game or a PC game. And again, all of those decisions should come from a very educated and thoughtful perspective. Sustainability is a lot about money, but not only about money. In the class, obviously, you're not going to spend money and invest in your projects, but this is something we'll discuss, and the idea of how you make something you take out to the world more than a one-time experience. Do you have a plan to take it further? Even if you got a grant from a foundation, how this project is going to live beyond that? What are you going to prove with the first grant in order to get the next grant, or maybe even make it self-sustainable by getting revenue or donations, etc. Only then we get to gameplay. And gameplay is something we'll discuss a lot in the class. Because gameplay and game design, because it's such a young industry as a whole, now I'm talking about games, not only games for social impact, the whole notion that there is something called game design that is not about visual design, it is about the mechanics of a game, what makes a game fun and compelling, is a relatively new idea. And, you know, someone mentioned Jane McGonigal, which is a rare case of a game designer that people actually know. But if you think about it, the game designers are not as known as movie directors and book authors. I think it will change, but it just shows you how new this whole thing is. And some of them are really amazing at what they do, but they're still behind the scenes and kind of sitting with their spreadsheets and making sure the numbers work just like you throw dice. But at the end of the day, that's the art of making games. Making sure that there is compelling gameplay. And in our case, making sure that the gameplay is related to the cause. What happens a lot is that people try to create educational games or games for social change where the gameplay is one thing and they try to put like public service announcements on top of it. And there's no connection between what you do in the game to what they're really trying to convey. There's something we call verbs, the things you do in a game. And the things you do in a game should align with what you're trying to reach in terms of impact. Execution is something that obviously we'll do in a small scale in the class, but is after you have all this planning and after you have your design in place, there's a whole art of executing a game. And unlike traditional media, this is interactive. And even from my experience with creating games, I was always surprised how audiences reacted to a game I created. It's very, very different every time. They might learn things you didn't intend to teach, and they might not learn the things you really wanted them to learn. And you can iterate and you can work with this feedback, and every person is kind of writing his own story when he plays a game, which is a very unique thing. Think about it again, compared to linear scripted media. When you go to a movie, you know how it begins and how it ends. With games, everyone has his own complete experience that is very personal. Everyone moves at its own pace, and you need to plan as much as you can, but you have to test and test and test and get the feedback of the audience in order to make it better. And the last one is assessment or evaluation that I mentioned before when I showed you some of the examples. This is something that becomes very critical to our work because people are no longer satisfied, especially funders, with the idea that we're just making games that are for good, and it's all great and the slogan is very appealing. They now want to see results, and in a way it's interesting. They're more demanding than with other media, and I think that some of it is because we're talking about this inversion of the perception of games that is hard for people to make, so we need proof. But I think it's also that in their instinct they understand that it's a piece of software. At the end of the day, it's not only media, it's code, and when you have code you can measure a lot of things. And the very recent trend in evaluation is called the embedded evaluation or embedded assessment, that is not only about asking people and making those traditional tests before and after. It's actually about planting indicators in the code. And when you have big numbers of people playing the game, even without asking them one question, you can get a lot of data and understand where they're stuck, what things they do more than others. And it's very relevant to learning because you can start to see how people make progress and what features are really contributing to that and which features are not. So I hope the last part was not too techy, but again, this is a very exciting thing that is relevant to games more than any other media. I think the idea that you can actually measure a lot of things in terms of the impact that you're aiming for and you're achieving. Let's do another pause and maybe do the last Q&A.
That sounds great to me. So we had a few questions that came out. One was from Jiyoung, and you spoke about it briefly, but it's this idea of what makes a game fun and how do you design that. She says, love serious games that make people do something. What is the most important factor for designing?
So first of all, in defense of what so-called serious games, I would say that it's really changing. I mean, it's true that in the first few years we suffered from a lot of what I call, not only me, but the chocolate-covered broccoli. That at the end of the day, it's broccoli, even if it looks like chocolate. This is changing. We see more and more very high production, very interesting games. You can find some of them on the site of Games for Change and play them for free. Commercial companies that are trying to make social impact games. Artists that are trying to chime in. So we see better products, and I think that to your question, the key is to balance it well. So it can't be that it's the two failures in our space are people that are taking the educational content and make it more important than anything else, the center of the experience, and instead of letting the players explore, it becomes preachy. People that play games don't want to be preached. They don't want you to give them the solution. They want to ask questions and find their answers, or even just stay with the questions. They want to explore. They want to even test the boundaries. And this is very important. When a teacher makes a game, it's usually going into right or wrong. And games are not about right or wrong. Games are about understanding systems and understanding rules. The other extreme is commercial companies that make very thin, games for change that everything is sacrificed for the fun aspect of the game, and the content is really thin or not accurate. I would say that again there is a way in between, which it's very challenging, but there is a way, and I've seen many games like this that are both challenging and meaningful, just like a movie can do the same.
Martha Berry has a question, which is, what programs would students be using?
Um, this is still to be defined exactly how we're going to do it, but the way we're thinking about it now is that we're going to introduce a few platforms that could make your life easier. We're not expecting you to code. We're not expecting you. I mean, you could do that if you feel comfortable with it, but it's really not the intention. The intention is to give you tools that could actually make it fun and make it faster to create something that you could show others and get responses to. So we're going to share a few tools. However, if you come with a tool that you're very excited about and we didn't necessarily discuss, we'll make sure to guide you and give you the option to use it. So we're not going to restrict you from using something. Again, in this case, the technology is more to serve you and to get you to your goal than to really study or learn new technology. That's less our goal.
And so another really great question that's been asked, students who are not only playing but co-creating the game, how is impact being measured?
So, I mean, it's a great question. This is where we in terms of using games and evaluating it, we're going to blurry places that are very, very far from the way, if you think about it, we measure students' performance in schools today, especially with some of the newest federal programs like No Child Left Behind. They really they're very, very precise in measuring knowledge gained or skills gained. When we go to kids making games, we're not measuring that. It's not about acquiring certain knowledge, or it's again going back to what I called 21st century skills. It's more about can they solve problems that they encounter? How do they think about systems? Can they collaborate to reach a goal with other team members? Even entrepreneurship, in the sense that they come with their own vision and they create something. So those are soft skills, but arguably in the 21st century environment, they're more important than, well, I wanted to say cracking a formula, but maybe I should. Anyway, then certain things that are taught at school, let's say that it's like that. And the whole idea that you acquire skills that are much more abstract, but at the same time are very applicable for the new working environment in 21st century.
And Ji-Young has another question, which is,
it's not going to be the focus. We're going to touch that, but it's not going to be the focus. I mean, we're much more interested in rolling the sleeves and actually making products. And as I said, letting people play them and respond to them, than about creating documents and plans. It does need to be a part of your pitch. So there's going to be an opportunity to pitch your idea and get the board's approval. And one thing we plan to have are guests from the outside. So we're going to bring some of the top game designers we know and some people that are kind of leading this space to actually give you critique, and that's kind of where that thinking will come into play. Yeah.
if anyone has
Any last question? We have kind of a few minutes. There is. I don't know if it says. Will we focus on how to plan? That's the final.
That was the Ji-Young, yeah. Focus on how to. This is Ji-Young is also asked about launching a real creation. The question is about, are we going to actually launch something, or if we're going to.
The idea is that we're going to actually make stuff. So it's going to be something that people can respond to, not as an idea or a paper. It's going to be something they'll be able to touch, and actually, and it might be one big project, but our current thinking is actually to to choose to divide it to 2 or 3 projects and get people the ability to work with different platforms.
I think that's fantastic. A lot of the methods that are being employed, all of the classes, is really learned by doing. Another question from Peggy Siegel. What games are you developing?
So, Games for Change is not a studio per se. So a lot of the games you will see on our website are games we're curating. So think about us more as a Sundance than a certain movie studio. Same time, we are producing a few projects. So we are working with developers and we're kind of bringing all the pieces together. One of the projects that we're executive producing and I'm most excited about is called Half the Sky. And it's a transmedia project based on a best-selling book by Nick Kristof and Cheryl Woodan. Nick Kristof from the New York Times. And it's around women empowerment all over the world. And we're creating 2 games, actually more than 2, but 2 components. One is a Facebook game that is going to implement the whole idea of real-world action, the idea that you buy a goat in the game and actually you are donating a goat to a family in Africa or in India. And we're also creating mobile games for very low-end devices. And we're actually creating a series of those games. So I'll give you one example of the games we're creating. It's called, on the mobile side, it's called 9 Minutes. And what 9 Minutes is doing is tackling a huge issue in the developing world of pregnancy and compliance with guidelines. The whole idea that many of the women and girls are not even aware of what they need to do throughout the 9 months. And we call it 9 Minutes because what we do is we compress the 9-month process into 9-minute session. And in a